Yeah, there's a few people. So I will post a couple of things in chat. Okay. Okay. So, welcome everybody. Anybody who happens to be out there viewing the channel. We have a handful of our people from our gaming group here to discuss our thoughts, our feelings, our considerations, I would say, to be political as far as the new rules and what we like, what we dislike, and some stories along those lines, no doubt, along the way. Try to stay on topic as much as possible. We have a lengthy list of things to go over. Feel free, as listed in the description, please toss a message into the chat if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts as to what we're talking about at the time. Otherwise, it's probably going to be a whole bunch of old guys and George just rambling on. Well, George and Josh, Thad and I are the old ones. The other two are young. Um, just rambling on about Star Wars and Legion and so forth. But as I posted, you're welcome to ask anything about the channel, our production schedule, our process, or of course Legion rules, which is really what we're talking about tonight. So let me start off by introducing myself. I go by Halfling13. Real name is Sean. I run all these different sites, do the editing, most of the filming, and at least a large number of the figures are painted, modeled, and assembled by myself. We have George. Go ahead and introduce yourself at least. Mhm. Yes, all the Republic. And which factions do you tend to favor? What's your favorite ones? Yeah, George is our jack of all trades, playing all the different factions. Um, Better than me, unfortunately, most of the time. Okay, Josh. Sure. And that you're the younger old guy, though. Okay, sounds good. So let's go ahead and kick it off, and we're going to go over to the cover mechanics. Um, so I assume everybody that's watching has read the rules, is familiar with most of the changes, but just as a basic primer, cover mechanics have changed such that light cover and heavy cover still exist, but instead of automatically canceling one save or one hit or two hits for light or heavy cover, you now roll multiple white dice based on the number of hits you take, and then either a success cancels hits on light cover or a success and surge cancels hits on light and heavy cover. In addition, duck and cover, or sorry, low profile, not duck and cover. Low profile has changed slightly. It automatically cancels one hit if you have cover. So very similar mechanics. Um, and then the other major change that we discovered as we were playing with the new rules is cover only provides obscurement and cover benefits if you're within the new half range marker of the cover itself, which is difficult to remember frequently because we like to say, yeah, that you can't see the figure, and then we realize, nope, you still don't get cover on it. So let's start. I guess we'll start the other way. Thad, what are your thoughts on the new cover rules? Pro, con, or? Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Okay, Josh, what are your thoughts? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, George, your thoughts?
Well, I think I like it. The smaller attacks definitely feels like what they focused on is still allowing them to be useful. Because previously, in the previous edition, if the enemy had cover, you're rolling 3 dice, you're not really going to do anything to them because they
Mhm.
have the automatic cover.
Okay.
Um, I think functionally though, with just basically they changed the automatic cover now to my personal opinion, just the backup mechanics now.
Right. Yeah, that
Um,
seems to have been a major change that still gives you that sort of feel. And we'll touch on backup when we get
yeah.
over to the characters area. I guess my biggest difficulty is it feels like cover is almost it feels almost irrelevant because the odds are so low to get any benefit from it. So I find that when we're playing the game, a lot of times the tactic is rather than get these guys into cover, it's well do something else, cover the ground, get closer to the enemy, etc. And if you happen to get cover, great. Otherwise, it's more of a secondary thought. Um,
That see, I agree with you, but it leads into if you took the cover mechanic from this version of the game and
mhm.
applied it to the exact rule set of the last version of the game, right? Then that would have been fine. But you couple the cover mechanic as it is now with the redesign of the way the mission objectives work, the way the teams come on the board, all that, and it becomes more impactful. And I think the older mechanics wouldn't have worked as well
Mhm.
with the push hard kind of feel of the new version of the game.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely share your sentiment there, Sean, with how it almost feels negligible. Like you shouldn't even be thinking about it. Like you're probably not going to save anything.
Mhm.
And I wonder if it's going to lead to a big shift in the community on changing up the table design a little bit. Maybe adding more line of sight blocking that can definitively
Right.
do something for your game. Like you will not be seen, you will not be shot behind XYZ piece there.
And I,
Um,
I I noticed that a bit at Gen Con when I took some pictures of
mm,
the official fields and boards. There was a lot more tall cover that, like I said, block line of sight instead. I mean, there was, I don't recall actually seeing any crates or barricades. It was all buildings and large vehicles that really block complete line of sight. So I
mhm.
wouldn't be surprised if
Yeah,
that's a shift. I know
yeah,
when we set up our board, we're tending to do the same thing again because there's already so many things that give cover. Um, it 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 feels almost like speed bumps on the board more than anything else.
sure.
And but it's interesting. I don't necessarily know if I like the thing. It feels like it's almost reduced too far
Mhm,
because I mean, especially with the design content of being two large armies of guys shooting guns or blasters at each other. Naturally, I'm going to assume you're going to try to take cover. If I was in that situation, the movies show the same thing and so forth. and this really de-emphasizes that aspect where, again, you don't really care about it. It's a secondary thought. And the only I think in the 4 games we've played since the new rules came out, I think we've only hit the statistical same number once, and that's
Mm.
I mean that's only when you have a really massive attack pool of hits that you're even going to come close. Otherwise, you're lucky if you get 1 or 2 in most attack pools, because the oversized platoons really aren't viable in many cases. There's too many other aspects that limit you in a lot of points and so forth. At least from the limited games that we've played. When I've been playing the Rebels, I've been making a point of playing the oversized units because I think, well, okay, Indomitable is great and I can nullify the suppression, but it doesn't help that much, especially when I roll bad on the attacks. But generally speaking, you still get killed quickly. The cover doesn't help you all that much.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Um, so do we think in general that cover and everything is a gain, a loss, are we comfortable with the mechanics of it? Do
I'm
we think
comfortable
they?
with the mechanics of it. I found the older system to be annoying when it came to cover.
Mm-hmm,
I really disliked it because the game boiled down to whether you're able to get into cover or
mm-hmm,
not. And it almost always felt like the unit that got caught out without that benefit of the cover just got mowed down. And for the armies that were aggressive, yeah, yeah, you know the games I'm
oh
talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. It's happened a
Uh,
few times.
Sean effectively tabled me in one game on the first turn because he had range 4, and this is for the audience, but he had range 4 on his entire Iron Empire list, and my droids just stood there and got slaughtered before they could
Mm-hmm,
ever get out of the basically out of their deployment zone on turn 1, and it was a foregone conclusion after the first 30 minutes of the game that, okay, well, this is done. I'm never going to be able to win this game, and the best I'm
mm-hmm.
going to be able to do is get 1 or 2. And I pulled out not a victory at the end. I still lost, but it was an arguable ending. Like, okay, I pulled some weight out of it, but it was so demoralizing to
Right.
have that happen, and that cover mechanic was a big part of that because we didn't have cover in the middle of the board on that particular layout, and it just got slaughtered as a result. The
Right.
newer system seems to gravitate towards the armies being more rushed towards each other
Mm-hmm.
than one army gun line and then the other one just meat grinder its way through it. And with this game, even with the droids, m- grinding through is really not viable.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I think
Josh?
ultimately it's a good change. I like it. Hardest thing for me is just gonna be relearning how to effectively move around the battlefield
Mhm.
Right.
in ways that are meaningful and that I can like rely on, understand the outcomes of
Right.
what my move is gonna. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that piggybacks on the idea that we need to relearn how to build boards, right?
Sure.
So
Sure.
we
Yeah.
did, we kind of had it figured out. I think George did a lot of time. He set up a lot of time, so he gets a lot of credit for
Hmm.
figuring out how to make a more balanced board. And Ben, one of the other players, had a lot to do with that. But I think now with the new cover mechanic, we're gonna have to relearn. Okay, what's a good flow for cover through the
Yeah.
field as you go from one side to the other, and where it doesn't, and this is going to be the problem with the blocking of line of sight as a counterpoint to the reduced cover mechanic,
Mm-hmm.
is we build boards now where we have lots of line of sight blocking. Then those armies that rely on the range are going to get just mauled, because if you're able to move from one point of invisibility effectively to another and then get into charge range, your B1s, what is it, the fleet troopers, all those white armor save type infantry are just going to get mauled by all the specialist
Right.
melee units.
Yeah.
And
Maybe.
And as a point of clarification for the audience, in the games that we play, in an effort to try to save time during our filming sessions, we do set up the terrain ahead of time. I know officially by mechanics, both players are supposed to alternate placing terrain out there. That is a different mechanic, and that's more of a house rule that we do, mainly for the time period that it takes to do the recordings. So there is some aspects there to keep in mind. If you're playing more traditional, where the players are alternating place and terrain, maybe it's less of a factor. I don't know. At least for us, for our group, that isn't the case because we're setting up the board ahead of time, trying to be as balanced as possible. So, okay, let's go ahead and move on to the second topic, which is that of squad upgrades. Specifically talking about the points adjustments, some of which went in, some of which might not have. The overall platoon concept of the extra 5, 6, 7 models in a unit, and general discussion over relative unit strengths. Thoughts along those lines? Let's start here.
George, do you have something?
Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead, George.
So I mean, the overall point things, I wasn't seeing any issues with
Mhm.
like point adjustments. I mean, they increased the vehicles slightly while also giving them a nerf, but now they can score in all objectives compared to only a few in the
Right.
previous game.
Do you
I
do you
mean,
think the points across the board are appropriate for the relative power level?
I I think so. We've not really played a lot with vehicles, so I don't
Okay.
100% know whether or not those are going to be point accurate still.
I know speeders
Um,
got what, a 20 or 30 point increase.
they got a decent bit. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, they got a higher amount, but it also allows you to be more aggressive and still capture those points.
Sure.
Because I mean, we were running into that one mission where all you have to have is one unit contesting the enemy point, and the enemy doesn't get any points.
Right.
So end of the round, you throw a speeder in there. Now the enemy doesn't get any points.
Yeah, and we saw that with Josh, your game against Ben. Speeders and Scout with the Tempest Force really made a big difference. He was entirely over the
Yeah.
board on your side round one. Um,
Yeah. It was a lot to deal with. It was a lot to deal with. Though I don't know if speeders deserve to go up in point value that much for their
okay.
ability to hold an objective because they also kind of inherently have a big con with them is that they get there so fast and they become one of the only things to shoot at.
Right.
It's kind of always been a speeder problem. Um, I don't know if they should have gone up in points that much, but I guess that's to be seen with with how the meta shakes up with all these different objectives. But Dan's force was definitely very oppressive.
Yeah, Dan.
Um,
Sorry.
but the speeders were the first thing off the board. Uh,
Yeah.
so I don't know, and
Well,
they didn't do really much for the objective at all for him. It's just more of tying me up. But
mhm.
you know, I
Well,
don't know.
do we think that one of the things we've talked about once or twice is the strength, the relative strength of melee focused units? And to my knowledge, those have not received any significant change in points, generally speaking. Do we think that those are still appropriate? Are they underpriced or overpriced?
Well, while the melee focused units did not get any points, there was a lot of core units that got melee focused
Mm,
abilities. Like the fleet troopers got
Sure.
charge,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. So I feel like there's more of an emphasis now into getting into melee combat a lot
Absolutely,
more.
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, absolutely with the mechanics and everything. But that's where I'm thinking:
Yeah.
is it again thinking Star Wars as a setting? It's not kung fu and martial arts and hand-to-hand fighting. It's blasters at range. At least from my perspective as traditional Star Wars. Okay, rebels and stormtroopers shooting at each other down a hallway, not running up and punching each other. Okay, and that feels like a notable shift. And in some ways, it feels almost like we're replicating other popular war games, especially fantasy-based ones, to enhance the fact that hey, you got this big horde charging in, and they're going to get into hand-to-hand combat, which is fine for some units. it makes sense. But I guess my challenge to adapt to is that it seems like a much stronger focus on that. I mean, I get that the Wookiees and the Magna Guard are all hand to hand guys. They're supposed to charge in and fight things. But when like the last battle we did against George, virtually your whole army that did anything of any consequence was melee.
Yeah, my whole army was range 2 or
Right.
in combat. And I mean, I had some good rolls here and there,
Mm-hmm.
but I had a distinct advantage over your whole army
Right.
because once it got engaged, you really couldn't do anything.
Right. That's the challenge I see with that, and that's where I'm concerned that um melee almost needs an increase in price, or ranged
Hmm.
only maybe needs a decrease in points. So that
Yeah.
because what we were finding is the Magna Guard, albeit relatively short range to start with, were able to get on top of the rebels within one turn, maybe two, despite focused fire. They simply couldn't be killed. They were too tough for the points, and
Yeah.
in many cases, it was most of the army shooting at them, and that balance feels off as far as the focus on melee.
So
Yeah.
for people who have an idea of what I was doing, I had Grievous and then with his entourage 4 full squads of Magna Guards with an
Right.
extra dude in each.
Yeah, it was very
So
much focused on melee, and I know that was your intent at the time to
yeah,
see just how powerful it was.
yeah, because I mean the first couple games I played with it, we did more of the traditional. We both have ranged units and we're skirmishing off.
Hmm.
But really, whoever pushed off the first round the most aggressive scored the points well ahead enough they just win the game
Hmm.
just that quickly. And I know we have a score section, but I wanted to see if the melee focus units just like capitalize
See,
on that advantage, and
Right.
they do.
I want to hop in here on this because what so far we've talked on two subjects, right?
Hmm.
We've the cover mechanic and now basically melee units, right? And both of them are issues that are highlighted by
Objectives
the
and scoring.
objectives,
Yeah.
right? So the new flow of the game has disrupted. They went ahead and this is going to be a general criticism for the whole thing, and I don't mean to be a negative Nancy here, but they went through and they basically changed the whole core idea of how the game is supposed to flow while not changing the units or really the point costs or anything like that or the army lists. So as you know, George is pointing out, it's fast melee units are king in the new system, and
Hmm.
there's lists that just can't pull that off,
Yeah.
and those lists now are going to need to be rebalanced, and I feel like, and this is the game that you and I played, Sean, was he who is the most aggressive
Wins.
right out the gate
Hmm.
wins the game, and like that's that's not a that's not a system I think should be in place. Every time
Well,
I've played a tabletop war game like that, you never knew in turn one unless somebody made a catastrophic mistake.
yeah. I
And
I had
yeah,
this. I had the same challenges playing my first two Rebel games, and we were still of the mindset that a gun line made a lot of sense,
hmm
and the Rebels literally just sent two or three units charging forward towards the objectives, and then sat there, and they couldn't be killed fast enough with what limited guns the other side had, and you score the points. So, admittedly, like I said, we'll talk about more about that on the victory point conditions and so forth. But I agree with you that it's sort of a running theme that's
hmm
potentially a root cause for some of these concerns.
well,
But
we discussed point costs, right?
mhm.
We discussed the point costs for the speeder units, and they haven't done a very good job. And I know you and I've had this discussion offline a couple times, where over the last few years they haven't done points adjustments
Right.
overall, like just looked at the entirety of the game and been like, okay, this unit's maybe 5 points too expensive, this one's maybe 15 points too cheap, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe we should give this unit an option that they don't currently have. So I think what you're going to see is these two like key points are going to keep popping up as we go through our schedule.
Mm-hmm.
What I will say about the points adjustments is I feel like they did a pretty holistic, like everything got changed to some degree, seemingly,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And the total point cost of your army went up, a fair bit. What I will say is, in all the fun theory building of lists that we all do, it feels really fun. Like I feel like I'm not missing out on anything that I want to be doing.
Right.
Um, I'm definitely someone who likes. I love the theme of all this. I love the theme of all
Mm-hmm.
the games that I play, and being able to have that army that fits like the fun, creative
Mhm.
idea that I have in my head. Like that definitely feels good.
Right. Right.
I think it's just a matter of relearning how to play like this new type of game, which we'll definitely talk about later.
Yeah. And
100%. From a separatist point of view, I always felt limited with the 800 point limit of going, okay, I want to put an absolute just giant block of B1s on the board
Hmm.
and just, because I mean, anytime they were in the media, it was always, just set, 200 droids standing there working as one unit, getting slaughtered, admittedly. But I wanted to continue that theme onto the tabletop, and it was always very difficult with the 800 point limit and with the maximum size of it. So with the new version, you could theoretically put an absolute ton of B1s on the board and still be well under your 1,000 points and have enough to have your commander and maybe a unit or two. Maybe you could do that tank with a whole wall of B1s in front of it.
Yeah,
I love that idea. I haven't
right.
had a chance to implement it because that's a lot of B1s to paint. But
a lot.
yeah. Oh, here's
So that
140
definitely
B1s.
transitions into the next point, right? Of
Uh-huh.
how do we feel about the new squad upgrades of
I love it.
potentially doubling the yeah.
Mm-hmm. I I think it has a lot of potential, and I'm in agreement with you. The fact that you can build much more thematic and
Mhm.
concept based armies is great. I don't necessarily know how viable they are from a
Well, they're
competition
not.
standpoint, but
They're not viable at all.
I mean, in
We'll
my
see.
case, I've been fond of playing 4 rebel heroes at a time. Old
Yeah.
Mhm.
system, that basically is your army, and then you got 2 minimal squads. Otherwise, now
We
you
are
can
going to talk
play
about
lots of it.
the heroes, right? And
I
and
think
the
Well,
overemphasis on heroes in the new edition.
yeah, we'll
we'll
talk about.
probably do
Yeah, the
together.
Okay.
next one's actually is characters. We'll get into. We can discuss that in more detail. So, any other thoughts on the points adjustments and so forth?
Well, I think with the platoon upgrades, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
for thematically and stuff like that, it makes a lot of sense. My overall issue I have with it is, except for probably the B1s, because you're wanting all the most miniatures possible on the battlefield.
Hmm.
You're spending the base price of the squad on an upgrade on that same squad, compared to you can just buy a second squad, have that extra activation, have that flexibility for claiming objectives and all that sort of stuff like that.
Right. And
Right.
I think B1s are the only unit that really can capitalize
Yeah.
on, and maybe that's what their intent was. They're like, well, we needed B1s to have more models in the unit, and they didn't want to make that change, so they just put it over the entire
Well, so
the entire concept of the game.
you're still
Because
limited
I
to
don't
6 core units and so forth, which would be where the extra sizes come in because you can't have extra
sure,
units then. But
but
I
you
would
you have what you end up though with is what 14, 15 B1s
yeah, I
in
think it's 15.
one activation. So you
Mm-hmm.
got 15 B1s in one activation. That still gives you the potential for what 90 B1s on the board.
Well, yeah, and with 15 B1s, it's like you can guarantee 1 hit for you for the B1s
Ooh.
out of that many dice. So I mean, they're not very
See, I'm
accurate, but at
gonna
least
Oh, that was low, man. Just
I'm
the
gonna
It's
I
I
for
think
rolled
I
terrible.
disagree on the B1s being the best candidate for
I'm
the
not saying
squad
that
upgrade.
I'm not saying they're the best candidate, but they're the only ones I can think of that would. I mean, thematically, it makes sense. I mean, who would you suggest is a better
To
option for that?
me, At this point in time, without
Hmm.
personally any reps of a squad upgrade, but just all the things I've been seeing and watching, I feel like those heavy like bruiser core trooper units are the ones that are going to want them the most.
Like the
I'm
fleet
thinking
troopers or the Black Sun.
anything that throws two
Black Sun
dice,
for
I
sure.
feel
Yeah.
like is way more beneficial for that.
Yeah.
Because in one activation you can do so much damage, whereas a B1 you're not doing a lot of damage. I feel like their strength has always been cheap activations, more thumbs, more units to claim objectives and contest things,
Hmm.
and I think you should still use them in that function.
But do they really qualify in that role when, I mean, the
Well, they may
38
not
points,
anymore.
fleet troopers, I mean, there's other core units that are pretty similar in price. Maybe 2 points higher, 4 points higher at most,
Hmm.
but I mean, 4 points out of 1,000, and when you're only talking a maximum of 6 activations, a maximum of 24 points, that's not that big of a deal. That's one upgrade on a squad, right? One
Right.
decent upgrade. So I understand your point. I just don't know. I don't know. I do see your point about having the guys with the red armor, with the 2 black dice shooting attacks, things like that. But you know, if you're worried about, maybe they did it in the idea was to allow people to field more of the special forces type units, and so you could fill out your core slot a lot easier,
Hmm.
right? And have more models on the board. Okay, I'm only going to use 2 core slots, but
Yeah,
have more special forces guys. I don't know.
Yeah. I
I
don't know.
I think it
I
has a place.
I
There's some units I think there's value to it. I think I agree with you that units that already have 2 dice per model, doubling up the number of models gives you that many more dice. But
Mhm.
at the same point, George is correct in that mechanically, you might as well have 2 units. You get just as many dice. Now you have 2 options you can take. You can split your fire. It functionally works about the same unless you've maxed out your troop picks.
I
So,
I think mainly with the B1s, I don't think their strength is in the point cost for activations. I think their main strength is you got the hit points. You're going into the last couple turns of the game and you're looking at, okay, what's the max damage the enemy can put out? And if you have B1s to match it, you're almost guaranteed the win of the game. I think that's their main strength because hit point wise, they're the hardiest hit point unit in the
Yeah,
game,
yeah, that's
a
valid.
core unit.
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so I think that's their main strength rather than their cheapness. Because I mean, if I in the previous edition at least, if I wanted to go like a swarm type army, I would just go with the rebel troopers because they're only a couple points more, and you can get the activations, and you're also throwing tons of damage out on the field.
Mhm.
The B1s I've always felt is you actually want to hold them up in reserve till round 4 and 5 in this case in the game, and then rush them forward because they just don't have enough damage to kill all the B1s.
2 points.
Yeah.
That's all. The rebels are only 2 points more expensive.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
yeah, but I see what you're saying though, because you're talking 6 models versus 4, both with white armor saves, but the rebel troopers do have the surge to defend.
You can, but there's a lot of mechanics in the old game and even more in this game where you could quite easily get your whole army surge tokens, and then it's like you're surging just normally.
Yeah.
Mm,
And the old game, rebels really benefit a lot more from cover, which, as we discussed, has been reduced in the effectiveness in general. So the
yeah.
rebels really took a hit from that standpoint. So, anyways, let's go ahead and move on, or at least transition over to characters, since we touched on that already. Especially with the expanded exemplar rules, or at least capability. More heroes seem to have it. Although personally, I feel it's unbalanced right now because a lot of characters didn't get a rewrite, so they don't get the exemplar.
Yeah.
Well, they
And
also
then the new backup mechanic.
well they also nerfed exemplar.
Did they? I didn't.
Yeah, we covered it. We covered it like the last game or whatever. Usually the last time the exemplar was tokens you have act as for other people arranged to act as if they have the tokens. You can spend any number. Now they reduced it more back down to the clone thing of you can only spend one of their tokens per instance. So I mean, they kind of gave him a
Okay.
clone-ish ability
Okay.
along with it. So I don't think it's that big of an issue. Some
I
characters did get a lot of really great abilities that, and then they didn't get a point adjustment for it. Like I know Veers has guidance vehicle. We've
right.
never played Veers in this new edition yet, but guidance was only a Yoda thing in the old edition, and that was powerful as it was. That's why you fielded Yoda.
Right.
Now Veers, a 90-point general, I believe, has guidance now,
Yeah.
so
I
that's
know, Josh,
powerful.
you used Exemplar during your game really
I
successfully.
did.
You used it on quite a bit as far as the models. I don't know if we necessarily
Yeah.
messed up and used it wrong in a couple of cases. This was new, but I know you used it a lot with what was Kalani, I think was in your army.
Yeah,
Um,
Kalani and the T series.
yeah.
So it's kind of like both of the prime targets for like some of the biggest reworks on like the characters. It's like
Hmm.
the generic general, and then sort of like the mid tier generals. Um, I think the changes across the board are pretty good. It really brings those units into the game a lot more than they previously were. Like usually you only took them for like that one specific function, like the generic Imperial officer for spotter one, right? Or the T series for direct, right? And that's
Right.
like it. That's all they did. I like that there's a lot more for them to do now.
Okay. And how do we what do we feel about the new backup mechanic?
I
Admittedly,
think
we
it's great.
forgot about it in the first game or two, completely overlooked it. Now we know about it. And specifically, the other piece that we found out is backup only applies to a ranged attack that's not within range two.
Yeah.
There's a couple of special caveats on it that it doesn't apply in all cases, um, but it's important to remember it. Let's see if I can find it in the rules while we're talking about it. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on backup, Thad?
I didn't really have any exposure to it yet. I would. It's tough to say because I don't think. I mean, it's awesome for like the squishier heroes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's better for them. It gives them more survivability. Lets them get their point value
Mm-hmm.
on the board in a better manner. But I don't like the trend of making the characters even more powerful,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I
That
I,
and I
I
get that.
if
It
we're gonna
feels
play a
like
heroes game, then let's play a heroes game. If we're gonna play a war game with armies,
right.
we've you and I have played other games where it ebb and flowed over the years
Mm-hmm.
through that mechanic, and when it was at the height of the character is God on the board and everything else is just kind of sort of there. It's
Mm-hmm.
frustrating because you're like, I spent all this money on these models. I spent all this time painting them. I bring them onto the board and they're worthless because the Jedi is sprinting through killing everything and he's invulnerable because oh there just happens to be a core unit near. I don't know,
Yeah.
it sticks in my paw. I don't like it.
I would agree. The between backup and the exemplar, in my mind, it really empowers the heroes to get up front and center with the army
Mhm.
and really encourages that, while at the same point it makes the heroes much stronger so that there's a tendency to lead into that. Now, some armies obviously favor them much more than others. Rebels, in particular, really like their heroes. I suspect most of the other armies, their heroes are just as strong if they're played in cohesion. But I hear what you're saying as far as if their whole design strategy was make it a war game, then overemphasizing the heroes is counterproductive because you're getting rid of units to put Luke or Leia or Han or somebody else on the field. One or two makes some sense. Beyond that, and it starts to, okay. Now we're just min maxing the heroes. Okay.
Yeah.
At the same point, I can also understand why most people, if they're playing Star Wars, they want to play their favorite hero. They want to have Darth Vader and Boba Fett. They want to have Han and Chewie out on the field and everything. And having what I always found was like Leia, for example, as an artillery general, she would stand in the back of the field, hiding behind a tree, not doing a thing, and once a game she would pop out, do her orbital strike, and then hide the rest of the time.
Hmm.
Which, I mean, yeah, you're playing the model, you're playing the game, but it's also not very heroic. It's not very cinematic. Because as soon as she stuck her head out, the snipers or the long range shooting would just kill her.
But
Now
that's
you
how it
don't
was
have.
balanced. That's the problem. And I was gonna bring this up, so I'm glad you went there.
Okay.
The characters were balanced in that balance as much as in any game like this could be balanced. In that, like Leia was squishy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of these characters, Veers is squishy, right? Uh, the tactical droid is squishy. So it was a counterbalance, right? Like, okay, they have really good range capabilities that can really ruin your day if you're the guy going up against them. Veers is annoying as hell. Leia is annoying as hell. But the counterpoint was if I could get my snipers in position, maneuver them around the board, and he exposes that character for a second, I might be able to take him out and not watch the artillery strike obliterate 2 of my units. Now, well, okay, Leia could be up front and just face tank her way through and still get her ability. They didn't adjust that side of it. So
Right.
we have the front side where, okay, this character's more powerful, but there's no way for me to deal with that now. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well,
It's
yeah. Oh,
it's
absolutely. I had.
they only modified one side of the equation without
Well,
fixing the
I
other
can make a
side.
counterpoint to you there, Thad.
Please, you have more experience than I
The
do.
other
So.
side of the, I wouldn't say that. The Sean said at the top of the round, you're way older than I am. You have way more experience. Uh,
He went there.
How dare you?
uh, so I think the counterbalance there to your point is the flow and um, the new objective and like the new game state. Like the backup mechanic only applies to range shots beyond range 2.
Correct.
And I think realistically in this new game, you're not going to be at that range for long. You're going to get into range 2 pretty quickly, and I think it's reasonable to
Mhm.
assume you'll be able to do that and like take down that Leia or that squishy hero that you're worried might be sitting in the backfield for too long.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
and it is viable to overwhelm that defense again because you're not getting cover. You still got your normal saves against George's Grievous and Magna Guard army. I fired everything I could at Grievous, and I didn't do any damage, not because of backup, but because with 12 dice I rolled one hit. I was just rolling bad. Had my large squad rolled reasonable numbers, I could have done some serious damage to Grievous, and it was a bit of a risk for him to be charging forward like that. Really, the dice ended up ruining that day. But originally the first few games I was very much against the whole backup process because we didn't realize the 2 range limitation on it. And yeah, if the general is within pistol range and you still can't hurt him, that's pretty potent. But this
Yeah.
allows the range guys not to be taken out from that one lucky shot where you got a friendly guy near them that's going to jump in the way. I, I don't
But how does
necessarily I don't necessarily agree with the fact that nobody else takes the hit. In my mind, it should be more like a guardian sort of thing,
Mhm.
but because somebody has to get in the way. But I understand the mechanics of why they did it, because what they were saying is during their playtesting that they did in house, the heroes rapidly became target number 1 for every army, and they were specifically targeting and sniping the heroes out of whatever game, which wasn't very fun. Again, because of the concept of you spent all this time making a really fancy hero model, painting it, doing the base, etc., and then as soon as the game starts, he's dead in round 1 because Chewie hasn't joined the board to provide Guardian to Han, and he gets shot. Which happened in one of the games. I had Jin who showed up on the field, and because she was just slightly out of range for backup, she took 4 hits out of her 5 round 1 and didn't really accomplish much at all in the game. Not that the Jin's all that great of a paint job, but that's the idea. They wanted to make it a reasonable use and not just wipe them out immediately.
I think you hit the nail on the head though with how to make it feel better, right? To make it
Mm-hmm.
just feel more palatable, and that is have it work like Guardian.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sure, yeah, you want to use backup, that's fine. That's 2 wounds going somewhere,
Right.
or at least 2 dice rolls going somewhere, not just disappearing into the ether of well, this character is now invulnerable.
Right. And that is a valid sub rule under backup. If your hero has Guardian, they can't use the backup rule. Okay, so if their whole mission is to protect other things like Chewbacca, he does not benefit from backup.
Or Kenobi.
Okay, permanently throughout the
Mhm.
entire game. Now he also has a side benefit that even though he's a hero and not a core trooper unit, he can provide backup to because he's what retinue or
Maybe
entourage,
teamwork or something.
but yeah, whatever the
Guardian, Entourage, and a retinue or something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
Multiple
whichever
things
one of
give
those
you backup.
allows him to give backup, even though he's not a core unit. But there's some limitations there. So we've bounced around a little bit on it. Let's talk about the mission system, both the process of defining what the battle is, the mechanics of how those battles play out, the options or lack thereof of the missions, and the advantages that are available in the game. What do we think about those? Let's start with Josh this time. You haven't talked for a while.
Overall, I feel positive about it. This is a change that I've been wanting for a while. To
Mm-hmm.
me, the funnest part of a war game is the objective and the scenario that you actually get to do. So I like it. I like that it's still kind of like a back and forth between the two players to ultimately determine what that game and scenario is going to be. Um, I like the addition of secondary objectives. I think that's super fun, something I've been wanting for a while. Um, I think the new advantages are fine. Um, I like that both players get their own.
Mm-hmm.
My only gripe right now is that the objectives seem to be pretty similar
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like the type of game that you do. Like I really used to like that there was a hold the point objectives and grab the box, grab the hostage and run objectives. I love the different ones like that. So I think they've alluded to more coming. So I'm excited to see that when it does come. But right now, that's my biggest gripe.
Right. Okay, George, what are your thoughts on the missions?
The missions again feel almost all the exact same. The only difference is you're choosing between 4 objectives, 5 objectives, or like 7 objectives. I think those are the ones just
Yeah.
on the field. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
one of them moves when you claim them, but they're moving a half range, so it could affect things, but I don't think it affects things a lot. And I think the overall idea of you're gaining points every round, I feel like it's actually making it much harder for someone to get back into it. Because if someone grabs a good advantage round 2 or round
Mm-hmm.
3, you're not going to be able to neutralize the enemy party from gaining points. At least not in a turn or two if they have that advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And with the cap of 12 points, you really can't stop them from outcompeting you.
Right. We'll,
Because
we'll we'll
I
touch
mean,
we'll touch on the points in a little bit. That's one of our later topics. So,
oh, is it?
yeah, it's one of the last ones we have at least on our schedule. I mean,
Okay.
no specific rules here. We could bounce around whatever. But I agree with you as far as the the sameness of the primary objectives. Now, I think the secondary objectives is a good add to the system because that
Hmm.
by itself really feels like each mission is somewhat unique. If all we
Yeah.
had is the primary objectives, then I think every game would basically be the same, with the only variation being the models and the terrain. Um, and I mean, we've played, I think in our battle reports, 3 different primary objectives, and they really all felt the same. I mean, other than some minor tweaks as to how you count the points, um, it's the secondary objectives that I'm seeing a notable variety, because those are not, here's a point of interest, now you have to get to it and hold it. It's some other criteria: get near the enemy unit, get away from the enemy unit, whatever. That really adds a variety, and I kind of wish that's the level that they had put into the primary objectives at the same point, okay, to get that variety. um, Touching on the advantages, I, I'm kind of disappointed in them that they don't have as more benefit of an actual advantage than what they could have. Okay, they feel like an afterthought of, yeah, let's give some choice to the players. And I mean, you have a strafing run and a ordnance blast, and I think the ordnance blast is the only one that can actually do any damage, and it's only if it hits a vehicle. Everything else gives
Mhm.
a single point of suppression. You have the
So
barricades, which,
stupid.
well, you have the barricades, which gives you heavy cover. It doesn't affect movement anymore, and we've already talked
We've
about
already
how
talked
heavy
about heavy
cover
cover.
is not really useful. So again, why do you have the barricades? What's the point? And that's
Yeah.
sort of my thought around the advantages. Sure, you could put them there, but when we're looking through the missions and you're choosing which one do you make change, the advantages are really kind of, nah, I don't really care about that. What I care about mainly is the secondary objective, because that's the one that really seems to have the most impact on how the game is played to make up the difference. Okay? I mean, otherwise, all I'm going to do is take my army and surge forward towards the points of interest and score as many points as I can as quick as possible.
Mhm.
So,
So I have seen interviews with Will Schick, and he has confirmed there are faction-specific advantages coming soon.
okay, that would
I
be
think
good.
that will be very cool.
Yeah, that could be. I could see a lot of potential for it.
Yeah,
I think
because you're right. Right now, though, they're kind of meh.
they're there, and yeah, you get a small
They're
thing.
all good, but they don't change the
Yeah,
game
they
much,
don't
I think.
affect
Yeah.
much. Yeah, I mean,
They're
in
all
my mind,
useful.
Yeah.
a lot of the command cards could have been converted into reasonable advantages, like the
Mm.
orbital strikes, and other things like that that are support. And that, I think, would have been, if it was at that level of power, that could have been more significant. If you get an extra orbital strike that actually hits something and does some damage.
Yeah.
Um,
And maybe that comes with the
I
new faction-specific advantages, right?
maybe
Maybe an
I'd be
Empire
curious about
one
that.
is a big Star Destroyer in atmosphere, and one round, maybe 2 rounds, you get
Right,
to place a point and do a bomb or something crazy.
right, or
Like
an
that'd be cool.
AT-AT barrage from range, or who knows what.
Exactly.
Something like that could be very interesting, and I'd
Yeah.
like to see that variety from it.
Well, we will see, I suppose.
Yeah, Thad, you've only set up the one game, and I know it took a really long time, which is why we didn't end up posting a video from it. What are your thoughts, other than obviously the fact that it takes a long time to go through those?
That is my first criticism of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not newbie friendly at all.
Right.
And even being an experienced Legion player, walking into that was like, what in the hell am I dealing with? Y- It takes, I mean, I'm sure this is like Magic the Gathering, right? So, oh yeah, okay, I know the 4,000 cards that are currently in circulation off the top of my head. I can see the artwork and I just know them. Me personally, no, I'm too old for that, and Magic's not my thing. But it feels like the game is going in that direction where more and more cards are being introduced to the system. It's going to become a card-based system, and so it's like, okay, now I have more cards I have to remember. I have more things I have to know. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, and so picking picking and choosing now, it takes so much longer because you got more cards to read through, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, this could be streamlined. This could be much more streamlined. Now, once the game was going, made perfect sense. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a problem with it. I don't like it from a newbie perspective. I do what in the chat, Brandon said something earlier that it's going to be easier to expand on, and I tend to agree with him. I think that
Mhm.
the expandability of it is a lot more. It's going to be a lot more robust than the prior system.
Yeah, a
So
lot more options.
that'll be awesome. But again, more options means more balance problems, et cetera, down the line. So they, as a company, have to be more proactive. And if they want to keep adding stuff into the game like these, well, they have to go and start tweaking everything else to kind of compensate. And so I'm worried that as they add more cards to that particular part of the game, things are going to get out of balance.
Right. Do we?
Or maybe they'll feel better. Maybe our gripes about cover right now will
100%.
feel better with new objectives.
Yeah, quite possibly.
100%, and that's
Quite
that's an
possibly.
entirely possible. They could be like, "Oh, look, there's
Could be.
a deficiency on this army. We can add this advantage to
Mhm.
help that army out, for a majority of the circumstances or whatever. Or hey, look, let's throw some stuff in there, and we could
Right.
throw some stuff in there and be like,
So,
oh, look, this guy has a very melee heavy list, or he has a very range heavy list. Okay, well, I know there's advantages I can pull out of to kind of help me fight that meta for that particular game. So
Right.
There's
I like
that.
I like it. It's gonna take some getting used to.
Hmm.
There's
yeah.
that, but I mean, if they have the advantages like that with the mechanics of it, the opponent can say, "Yeah, I don't want you to have that advantage. Draw a new one." And then your faction-specific ability that you were accounting for with your army is now in the discard. You have to spend the rest of your turns in your options trying to get that back into your stack,
Hmm.
and that's only a chance you get it back in because it's still random draws. So you're not placing one. There's no strategy with choosing the objectives. Like I feel like there should be. I feel like you
Right.
should be able
Mhm.
to choose which objectives you go, and it's more like a mind game of do I want to do this one first because he might eliminate that first, and at that point I draw a new one. Compared to this is just more luck of the draw. What you get is what you get.
Right. And that was sort of my thinking is there enough tactical differences in all the cards currently available, admittedly not knowing what they're going to expand to, that there's any substantial difference to picking and going through the mechanic versus simply rolling a dice on a table.
At the moment, I feel no.
Right. And that's sort of what my thought was as well. It's between the random draw initially, the ability and the minimal benefits that they have, it feels almost worthwhile just to roll a handful of d6s off of a standard table for the three things, and that's what you get. It doesn't feel like there's any real meta game or mini game to it beyond that. And maybe we're wrong. Maybe somebody in the audience says, "Oh my God, this particular mission is excellent. You should always pick it." I haven't seen that in the games that we've played. Which, if we're at the point of, well, it's going to be random anyways, then okay, why do we spend 30 minutes trying to figure out our specific options when we could just roll dice and be done in 5 seconds?
Mhm.
Similar to other games. So okay, let's go on to our next one, which is movement mechanics. Um, Specifically talking about the new vehicles free pivot like move. It's not technically a pivot, so you don't get all the keywords, but when you move, you get it. When a vehicle activates for a move, you get a free 90-degree turn. The changes to how the movement stick is used, and specifically the ability to place the model anywhere touching it versus only in the slot, and what effects that might have. Vehicles in general, as far as how they score, how they work, and everything, and then the mechanics that they've removed displacement and the equivalent sorts of abilities from vehicles. You can no longer land your vehicle on an enemy unit. You don't cause displacement by going over them. You can't affect other models anymore when the vehicles move in. What are our thoughts on those modifications? You like it? Okay.
So
Across the board.
having,
So you
yeah,
don't go ahead, Josh.
I'll go. I've used the oblong base persuader tank, like the most
Uh-huh.
awkward vehicle you can use, right?
It is.
It
Um,
is. It's awful.
I was very scared at first when I read through the whole rule book. I said, "Wait, where was displacement and all that?" And I realized it wasn't even in the game anymore.
Mhm.
But after actually playing it, I think that free pivot move. That was not a pivot, right? I think that free rotation helps a lot with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think in that game I was able to make a crazy like swing around a building, like which would have taken like 3 turns,
Yeah,
you
it
know, in the
was
old
wouldn't have
version
been
of the game.
possible in the old mechanics.
Right. And that felt good. I think that's a good trade-off, not being able to displace anymore. And I get why they don't want you to displace anymore because of just how all these objectives work, and you can only score if you're like on the objectives. So I
Right.
get that. But then they also a little bit more of a trade-off where it's kind of cleaner. You can just move through anything now. You can move through any model. Any model can move through any model, which
Right.
is a little bit cleaner. Um, and so I think it's ultimately going to be okay. But after playing with that weirdest base, I thought it was fine.
That I think is there's going to be a lot of units that are going to benefit from it that I think people weren't taking because they were so damn difficult to maneuver around the board. The
Mm-hmm.
Persuader tank, an absolute nightmare to use, and it was awful. And the Droidicas, right? It was too easy to accidentally, and we talked about this the other day, Sean. It was too easy to accidentally put yourself in a position with the move stick where you're like, I just ran into a wall.
Right.
Mm,
And
Right.
and now you're like, okay, I gotta spend an entire turn just turning this thing. And it
Yep.
was so clunky and unnecessary. And I like the removal of restriction on the vehicles. It makes them a lot more viable. It makes it makes there was a lot of especially there was a lot of really cheese. I'll just put it cheese. There's a lot of cheese tactics you could use with the overrun or not overrun displacement. And one of our other players that William ran into this where one of our other players surrounded his vehicle units, his they were speeder bikes, with all of his infantry, so he couldn't be overrun and he couldn't be displaced. When William's entire list, it was a Shadow Collective list built around that mechanic,
Mm-hmm.
and it completely neutered his list. He got tabled basically as a result, and it was not a fun experience for that player. And I like the idea that we've removed some of that cheese out of the game. And I understand tournament players are tournament players and they're going to do everything they can to win. No problem. That's a different mindset than the way I am. But those type of things, removing those capabilities out of the game is a net positive for the community. Sure, the tournament hardcore guys are probably going to be a little annoyed at that change. But
I
the plebes, the normal players, I think it's a positive change.
I
I
think there's new the biggest change there is there's new ways to annoy the other player now, such as
mhm.
I mean a 15-man B1 squad can stop a vehicle from moving simply by spreading out in front of them. And
Hmm.
if you have nowhere to put your vehicle within that movement, you simply can't move. I mean, even if you take your 90-degree turn. Now, the 90-degree gives you a whole lot more speed and capability, but it doesn't take much to stop a big vehicle as a result. The the concern I have though is the functional criteria of the traditional tank shock maneuver and the fact that it simply doesn't exist. And I
That
mean,
is a huge
I,
failure for
I
the game.
I'm admittedly it's the old school mentality of mine of playing old Warhammer and so forth, where you got a tank and you see the enemy troops and you race towards them and they can try to stand their ground and get run over, or they can panic and run away. That basic concept. And by removing the overrun or the displacement, which is what that simulated, you now no longer have the option. If you want to take the Imperial transport tank and run into the enemy unit, all you do is magically appear on the other side of it, and the troopers just move out of the way and say, "Oh yeah, look at that, it's a tank," and don't really care. And that feels off to me. Okay, I get from a gameplay ease of use and everything. It's probably the right decision, but maybe it should be a keyword that you can add to certain vehicles, because I
You
don't
already
think, like,
kind of have that with Overrun, don't you?
no, no.
Not
Well,
really.
some of them have overrun, but that's a completely different mechanic, and the ones that have
Sure.
overrun are different styles. I mean, I'm thinking like an airspeeder shouldn't have anything like that because they're flying fairly high. A swoop bike has overrun and can make an attack, but wouldn't necessarily displace people. But a tank, any one of the tanks that the armies have, that would be scary if it runs through your units. It can't
Yeah.
do anything else, but
Nobody wants to
that's
be flattened by an ATST stomping on them.
right.
You know,
There's certain things like that that I feel that it sort of missed the mark a little bit along those lines. I get why they did it. Like I said, I think the flexibility of being able to move and the difficulty that they've introduced to really lock a vehicle down is a good thing. But it feels like they either went too far or maybe not far enough as far as that modification.
is this a side effect of the new pace of the game?
Uh, in what way?
Well, it feels to me that the new pace is try to go for the decisive victory in turn 2
Yeah,
by
absolutely.
capturing your points, et cetera, et cetera. And as a
Mm-hmm.
result, they had to modify the vehicle rules to allow that to be the vehicles to be more flexible and for troops not to get as locked down by vehicles.
There
Is
is
that a symptom of that, or is it just a happy coincidence that they made these pace changes to the game and then made all these other vehicle changes? I don't know which
I,
came first, chicken or the egg in that.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could see. I mean, certainly, from a victory point condition, there's a lot of advantages to being on the point of interest in turn 2.
Hmm.
Okay, and if you're on the point of interest, the vehicle can't get you off. I mean, you could fairly easily lock down a POI since you have to be within half a range of it, and two squads. You can't get a vehicle into that area because you can't displace them and you can't land on top of them. But vehicles count now. Now, whether that was intentional or a happy side effect, I don't know. Similarly, if the vehicle goes first, it could do the exact opposite and keep the troops off of it because they can't
Hmm.
be on top of the vehicle. So I think there's some give and take there. Um, but that's a good transition into when we're talking about getting to turn 2 and the scoring and everything, the deployment mechanics. Specifically around the new mechanics for prepared positions, scouting, infiltrate, and the whole turn 0 deployment or turn 1 deployment versus what was pre-game deployment before. What are we thinking as far as good or bad? And George, you look like you're
I
frowning, so I'm
I
thinking you
w-
have a thought
I
here.
was well, I was totally skipped on the movement, so
Oh, okay, that's fine. What are your thoughts on movement? Then we'll go there.
I wanted to bring up some movement stuff.
Sure, that's fine. It's open
Um,
discussion.
so I mean, with the overall idea of the vehicles having a lot more maneuverability, I think while yes, they get the 90-degree pivot and stuff, I think they may have limited it more because they don't have the displacement. Let's just take the 14B1 squad example. They can now they can go here at range 1.
Mm-hmm.
So you can easily do a scattered formation of 3B1s, the bare minimum. Do a formation that covers your whole army. It's a range 3 basically block that you can't overrun in because you can't land on top of the units. And you have enough spacing in your units, you can have your whole army in those blocks of B1s.
Mm-hmm.
And tanks can't roll through them, overrun can't roll through them, any of that, any of that.
Hmm.
So you're now stuck going around the army and only hitting B1s on the corners.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a major issue with the overrun in vehicles and stuff. Geonosians don't have that issue because they're troopers. But the swoop bikes and the Wookiee helicopter definitely will have those issues. And I feel like I've never really liked how they've defined like the air vehicles. I feel like you should still be able to have units like I mean, it would be strange, but like have the units on the bases because they're in the air. They're not
Mm-hmm.
contributing to any ground occupancy.
Hmm.
So I still think that's really weird, and especially now they can't go over the units at all now.
Well, I mean, the airspeeder makes no sense in this game in the first place as a unit because in every cannon, every piece of media, it's zooming by at 400 miles an hour, right? And covering entire battlefield in a matter of seconds.
Right.
And it just shouldn't be on the tabletop. It just doesn't thematically make sense for the ground war to be. Have it as a card. You know what I mean? Have it as a card as an airspeeder strike or something like that. You can't unrewind that. You can't rewind that and undo that introduction of that piece into the game. But and that's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, the airspeeder sits on a huge base. It sits up really high. It makes no sense that it can't have anything underneath it because in
Right.
reality, the damn thing's 100 feet in the air.
Right.
And
And
It
that, I mean,
actually
that's
is on a card now, Thad.
is
yeah.
it?
The
But it,
airstrike,
Isn't
I
it?
think, I think the airstrike technically is the airspeeder flying past.
Strafing run advantage
Yeah.
is the picture of the airspeeder.
Yeah.
So it is both now.
yeah,
It's
I
both.
mean,
It's the worst
Yeah.
of both worlds for you.
Yeah.
oh,
But
fantastic.
I agree that, I mean, obviously the mechanic for not being able to put an airspeeder over a ground troop is so that you're not damaging painted figures.
Right.
Okay. And that's purely a practical nature of it. I get that. I again, that it feels like it should be an exception of those are models that maybe they can't finish an activation over an enemy unit, but they can finish a move over an enemy unit. Okay, as long as that way you could still go over them with both of your actions, etc., get the distance, rather than, well, sorry, you're within one movement of that ground troop that can't even hurt you because you're immune to everything that it can shoot at you. It can't charge, you can't do anything, but it can block your movement.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that can be an interesting balance change.
yeah, it could be. I don't know. I don't know what a good solution for that other than making a three-dimensional board where you can actually place it above the physical figures such that you don't damage them. Because I wouldn't want to mess up anybody's paint or figures or anything like that by balancing them on a bunch of stormtroopers or something along those lines. That would be impractical, especially at a tournament. Um,
I'll go back to my original counterpoint for the heroes. These vehicles, for them to score, it really doesn't take much. Just getting on the board with one move is probably enough to get you in scoring.
yep,
It's probably not going to be a ton that's going to block you up at that point.
yep,
So maybe yes, theoretically you could take that separatist invasion force and throw 100 B1s across the entire battlefield. Like, is that ever actually going to happen? Maybe. I don't
I
know.
don't know. It's a
Maybe it'll
challenge
be
for
just
Thad.
Challenge unlocked.
Yeah. It'll be a challenge for Thad.
do it.
Next battle report, we want 20 activations of B1s.
Printer go
Let's do
burr.
it.
Okay. Anyways, let's go on to the deployment mechanics, like we were talking about. Let's keep moving on this. George, what are your thoughts on deployment
Sucks.
and the new turn one?
I really don't like it that much. It, I feel like it extends turn one dramatically because
Mm-hmm.
everyone has to debate, okay, I'm deploying my unit and I have no idea where the rest of the army is. They could easily have their whole army on the opposite side of the battlefield
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't even know. The prepared positions, I feel like is a drawback overall. While yes, you start in your friendly deployment zone, basically infiltrate with a dodge, but you reveal exactly where you are beginning of round one.
Right.
They can plan around it relatively easily, and you only have a dodge. Um, infiltrate and scout, I feel like, is more powerful now, just because if you're dealing with more of a rush type army, if you have scout, you move on to the battlefield for free, and then you get your two actions. You can do whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing I had with my Magna Guards and stuff. I had Grievous with Scout, because I took the recon intel, and I managed to jump on Sabine beginning of round two. First activation round two, Sabine was dead
Right.
because Grievous just has that extra distance with the Scout. With the Scout now, and you effectively get three actions with Scout, and then Infiltrate starts in the friendly territory, and you get your two actions. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the same.
Infiltrate feels almost like a Scout 3 for everybody, based on where you can place your guy. And I've with the rebels, I was trying the laser turrets again, and I found every time I fielded them that prepared deployment was a drawback in every time, because most of the time whoever was playing would see the turret and deploy their vehicles either in the prime position to destroy it round one, or they would be opposite side. And
Mhm.
I would go most of the game not able to shoot the blasters at all because I just didn't have any lines of fire. It feels like it should almost be maybe infiltrate with a dodge, and maybe that takes an action or something like that. I mean, it shouldn't be if it's prepared defenses, it should be more of a I have an advantage for that because I have a prepared defense. Um, Instead of I just revealed my play before you can do anything, and then you're free to deploy your army however you want.
Yeah. Well,
So
I mean, that highlights. I think that's the biggest problem with it, right? Is I'll take the game that you and I played as a group. You put your turret on the one side. I deployed enough forces, I thought, to kill the turret, and you deployed most of your army as a counterpoint, right? But then you were able to put a couple guys on the other side and win the game,
yeah,
and
mechanically.
just in turn one, because we figured out at the end of turn one, because that's all we ended up playing in that game was the one turn, was because there was literally mathematically no way for me to get an army over there to secure those points. So you ended up with such a point heavy lead that unless there were miraculous dice rolls, the game was secured at turn one. That's nuts. That
Hmm.
should never happen. You should never be able to secure victory on turn one in a game like this. And the fact that they designed the system, even with bad deployments, you should still have the option, right? You should never be able to go, okay, well, I just brought my army over, set it all up,
Hmm.
and within 20 minutes, I know I've lost the game. And that's a huge failing on the part of this new deployment mechanic. How to fix it? Not a clue. I like the prior system of designing it out, put your army out, and go forth.
Hmm.
Trickling onto the board. One, if you trickle out like a 80 point unit, right? And the other guy's like, hey, here's my AAT tank. I'm going to drop it, use Arsenal 2, and delete that squad before you can do anything, which
Hmm.
I kind of did with you with the Death Troopers.
Yep.
That's not fun. That's not fun for either side. It's like, it felt great at the moment going, ha ha ha, I obliterated your guy. And then I thought about it afterwards. I was like, that just felt wrong. It just
Yeah.
didn't feel balanced or fun.
I've run into that several times with the rebels, partially because I haven't adapted to the new mechanics and I don't know how to play them as such. I keep either going too far forward or exposing them.
Hmm.
Um, I've lost units fairly quickly by that methodology. It feels like you either need to have a very aggressive force that's all going to dive forward towards the objective, or you need to play extra conservative up against the back wall where nothing can get within range.
Right.
And
And
then and
then
and then you're on the defense getting to the points on on turn two.
yeah, like
So
let's say in that army I had put my list and spread it out on the back wall,
mhm,
right? And you rushed forward to grab those points. Game's still secured in your point because there's no way for me to kill all the units that you could have put in
right,
there in turn two
right.
and secured points. It's I'm gonna say it. I think it's stupid. I think it's an absolutely stupid system that I've never seen in a tabletop game like this, and it is the it's a terrible implementation, and I hope that they can refine it and make it more balanced over time with more playtesting, but it feels so half-baked.
Well, I, I wouldn't go that extreme. George, before I jump back in, George, what are your thoughts on the deployment? Give you an
Um,
opportunity before we skip you again.
so I did talk about
Everything
it
Thad
the
said was
first
wrong.
time.
That's right.
But I mean, the other keyword you didn't include in the thing was the reinforcements keyword, because that
Okay.
was heavily changed. I know super tactical droids can give it to 3 units, and then there's a couple other units that might have it, but it's
Mm-hmm.
really just separatists. Previously, that was you have those units and you hold them in reserve to deploy specifically last once the enemy units are all set up. You set them up a whole different setup zone.
Mm.
Now they've just reduced it at the end of round one. They get to make a free speed one move, which feels very not. It doesn't feel intuitive at all with it.
Right. It's like it's sort of like a scout, but not a scout, and at the end of the turn.
At the end of the turn, yeah, it's
Right.
it's very and it's very easy to forget. Like I almost forgot it during that game,
Uh
but I was
huh.
specifically watching for it because I wanted to do that and try out that rule. But it's very awkward.
Right. Looks like we've lost Josh in his with his new kids. So let me make some
Josh
adjustments.
has 2 babies, guys.
Yeah.
He may be gone for the night.
Depending on which ones of them woke up. Let me make an adjustment real quick on the Discord on the camera view while we go ahead and continue talking about the deployment. Um, I was going to make a point, but I've already lost what I was going to say. The issue I have is it feels like turn 2 is the old turn 1, and it's good that we can deploy, but it should be a matter of in the old game you deployed everything and nobody could take any actions, so you could adjust based on where the deployment was using your command card. If you were in a bad position, you could play a high priority card to try to get out of it. Now you're playing a command card without any concept of what the other player is doing, and going last throughout the turn has much more of a difference.
It looks like you've cut
Yeah, now I
off
cut George off.
George's head.
I did. Okay. There we go. A little better.
No, you're right though. You're right, and that flexibility feels like it's been removed.
Yeah.
George, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that. I mean, there's a lot. You also do get a lot of advantages. I also used Grievous's one where everyone in like a range one or something gets surge tokens equal to the amount of people in range one of that unit. So all my units had like 13 surge tokens walking onto the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
So there's those advantages where if you need those orders that are your whole army's close, you can do that round one, and that really soaks up all the long range shots the enemies have.
Mm,
But you're not going to be doing anything flashy. It's going to be those defense maneuvers and stuff like that.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it gives a lot of weight to scout too. I noticed.
Yeah.
Uh, like all the Death Troopers had scout and all that, and they were able to maneuver pretty deep into the board and shoot turn one. And I was getting plenty of shots in on Sean that he couldn't retaliate with.
Yep.
And that's while that does happen in any game like this, you're going to have moments like that where where there's retaliatory fire that can't happen. It's never a good feeling when it happens, and that's not the way you want your players. That's not what you want your players to experience. You don't want your players to experience frustration in core mechanics. So I think, like I said, I think there needs to be a tweak there. Hell if I know how to fix it though. Not without scrapping it. There's got to be something.
We had a question in chat that isn't your first action turn 1 a move, so you can't issue tokens. You are allowed to issue tokens to any undeployed units that are all in effectively a holding area. You can anything that's on the board can also get tokens. The two are specifically in different areas. Um, but it's a compulsory. You're saying first action turn 1 is a move. Yes. Your first action when you deploy has to be a movement on it. If you have scout, then you get a scout move first, and then you take your regular actions. If you have infiltrate, then you infiltrate anywhere within friendly territory and then take your 2 actions. If you have reinforce, then you deploy normally, and at the end of round 1, you get a free speed 1 move for any units that had reinforcement.
Yeah.
Everything else is compulsory. First action is a move onto the board. But they can still receive tokens. They can still give tokens based on whichever actions they use after that. Or if they have command card abilities or automatic ones, they get it during the before they're even deployed, which is how like droids can do things. And because orders can now be given out infinite range, you can give, if your general is on the board and gives an order out, or vice versa, you can give those orders to anybody whether they're deployed or not.
Which
So,
that's a fantastic change.
I do like that change. Yes, that's a good one.
It
So,
just never made any sense. It never made
yeah.
sense. In we can fly around the galaxy in a matter of minutes. We can blow up entire planets with space lasers made out of lightsabers and
Stormtroopers
yada yada
don't have
yada
cell
yada yada.
phones.
But they can't use a CB. You know,
No.
they can't. There's no headsets. It was silly. It was a silly limitation. I'm glad it's gone.
That's why on the Death Star they had bad transmitters.
Yeah.
Okay, so the big one is victory points and turn mechanics and so forth, specifically around the objectives, the scoring, and the change to 5 turns. And I would tack on to that the overall claim that the game is, quote, faster to play, which at a high level, I don't disagree. All of our games have been faster because I think we've only made it to turn 4 in any single situation. Most of the games are done by turn 3, and the game you and I tried to play was done before the end of turn 1, which is an interesting segue because you were talking about how it felt very one-sided, where I would deploy my rebels and they'd be blasted by the Empire at the other side,
Mm-hmm.
unable to shoot back, unable to do anything. Yet by the end of turn 1, we both agreed the rebels had won the game. Hadn't killed.
Right.
I think I killed one guy, but purely from the order of deployment, I had secured enough points by turn 2. Mathematically, you couldn't have won.
Right, and that's an absolutely pants on head design.
it feels wrong. Now, some of that might be lack of experience with the new rules. Okay, there's some aspects of that, but I don't think it necessarily would have gone anywhere differently otherwise on it. Looks like we've gotten Josh back. Presumably his kids have stopped ambushing him.
Sorry, bad technical difficulties there.
You're still having some microphone issues.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, that's a bit of a whine to it.
Yeah.
Shoot. This is the best I got for now. My phone died and I had to jump on the old Xbox.
Okay. So that's fine. When you're not talking, it does whine.
Okay. I won't talk. Where are we at?
We're on victory points and the turn 5. Or 5-turn game and the mechanics and so forth. So the overall thoughts around victory point mechanics and so forth. And what I was saying is, what was interesting is the last game that we tried to record with Thad. He was commenting in the previous section about deployment how the game felt very one-sided, where the rebels would deploy and they get blasted by the Empire. And I think I lost a third of my army on turn 1 just deploying.
Yeah, it was brutal.
I killed maybe 1 or 2 models on the Empire side, but at the end of turn 1, purely due to the deployment, we concluded that there was no way for the Empire to win. Which
so I mean, I feel like I kind of felt similar in my game with Dan, and I don't know if it's necessarily a flaw in the game design or perhaps just a flaw in not knowing the best course of action to take from the jump in the new format. I like the 5-turn game. I think it's personally okay. I like the continuous scoring of victory points, especially since there's so many different avenues now to do so. I think that's just fine. It's just going to be a matter of learning the new objectives and learning the best pace to play at. and when you want to actually jump up, when you want to maybe deploy it slightly more defensively, to make a push later on, or however it's going to work out like that.
Right.
I think, see, like with the deployment that Sean and I used, right? I didn't overload one side of the board completely. I still had units in the middle. The problem was there just wasn't enough time in turn 2 for me to get there and get him off the objectives. So you have to, when whether it's 5, 6, 7 objectives, whatever, you have to spread your list out and push for all the objectives at once, which means that the game is going to feel the same effectively every time.
Yeah.
It's the only real mechanic is going to be how you've got the board laid out and your dice rolls. You just know that, okay, I know the other guy's going to have to spread his army out. I know I'm going to have to spread my army out and design my list accordingly. It's such a limitation. I don't like the idea of turtle armies. I don't. I never have. The what was it? The rebels or the not the rebels.
Oh,
The Obi-Wan force bubble
Clones.
shenanigans that he was able to
Public,
do.
yeah.
The clones. Thank you. That was the most frustrating thing I've ever experienced in a game, and I'm glad that that's kind of eliminated through this game mechanic. But there's got to be a better way. There has to be a better system.
And
Yeah.
that was one of the aspects during the pre-release. They were commenting they spent a lot of time focusing on how they've expanded clones to prevent them from being required to stay as a small bundle. They changed the mechanics such that they could spread out without really suffering any major drawbacks. And I like that aspect. It gives them the flexibility.
Hmm.
The problem is they glossed over the fact that that's how the new game is sort of designed to play. So if they hadn't done that, the clones would have been a non-viable force. They would have lost everything because you can never claim the objective set.
Yeah.
I do think as part of the changes, the separatists are a far stronger force in the capabilities, both between the ability to issue orders anywhere on the board and the mechanical reduction in the effect of AI. The game or two we played with, like George, there was virtually no time that he would ever have to suffer from AI anywhere on the board with his forces spread out across the entire side.
and I
Which
didn't
is
have a lot of face-up order tokens on the board at all.
so why
Right.
include AI at all? This goes back to what I said at the very beginning of this discussion about how they made these massive changes to the game without going through and tweaking the armies.
Right.
And so, like, Separatist is a great example, and AI is a great example. It just shouldn't be in the game anymore.
It's there and it has an effect if you really play ineffectively. I mean, it could come in, but even then, I mean, it still forces you to do like your key functionality. A B1 has to attack, a BX droid has to move or dodge. I think a
Mm.
couple of things like that. Which are they really a drawback? I don't know. In the old system, and that sort of goes back to the point values. If AI doesn't have a value in the game, then should they still have discounts for having AI, which is defined as a drawback? At which point, I could argue that maybe the points for droids should go up slightly, and
I don't know.
in concept, remove AI.
Maybe,
So
maybe.
I don't know. I don't know what the right solution there is. Like I said, we're just theory crafting here.
The only
Um,
advantage that AI gives you, disadvantage, really, I mean, it's turn 2 and later. First turn, AI doesn't have any real bearing in the game. Turn 2, I could see where, okay, making sure that everybody that's on the board has a face-up order token gives you a lot more flexibility, a lot more control, versus some of the other armies where, okay, only 2 or 3 guys on the board will have face-up order tokens generally,
mhm.
and you're pulling from the pool. But a lot of the smart players limit the number of unit types they have, so they can be like, okay, well, I know I only have troopers left in this
Sure,
pile,
sure.
or I only have special forces left in this pile, et cetera, et cetera. Because ultimately, all these games are catered towards the tournament players. So
Right.
Where's the balance?
Yeah, I mean, those are typically going to be where the market is being driven by, based on what people are buying and volume and
Mhm.
everything. So,
I,
um,
I would go ahead and say that the I think actually is it has more of a disadvantage late game, not
Yeah,
because
100%. As you're losing units, it's hard to keep that chain
well,
going.
you don't need the chain anymore.
yeah, you don't need the chain anymore. You don't need an order.
Yeah, you don't need an order now, but it's mainly since your whole army is spread out because you still have to be in range 3 of an HQ or someone that can give orders. So,
Right.
I mean, unless you have an override person, and then that's range 5. So that's
Right.
basically you don't have to worry about it.
But by
Um,
turn 2 or 3, you could lose an HQ,
yeah,
and that's where then the AI could become fairly important.
potentially, but currently it's you don't need the chain anymore. That's what I did with my Grievous army. I did not chain at all. I had B1s, didn't chain with them because it didn't need to. I had 2 face-up order tokens each round
Right.
and
Yeah.
played perfectly fine.
Yeah, didn't have any drawback there. So, as far as moving us back to the scoring topic, I guess my biggest challenge with the points, I like the concept of play the game till 12 and then it's done. It makes the games go relatively quick and you know exactly how close you are to winning and finishing. Versus the other game where you felt compelled, if it was a close game, to play all the way to turn 6 to make a determination. Okay.
Mhm.
The problem that, and originally I thought, hey, this is going to be nice because you can see where your momentum, with the assumption that each round you're going to get 1 or 2 points, and maybe some rounds you get 1 and then you get 2 or 3 to start to catch up, and you're sort of keeping pace with the other player. What we found in the current games we've played is that initial surge, somebody gets 3 points, 4 points, the other person gets 1, and then the next turn they get 4 or 5 points, putting them up at 8 or 9, and the other one gets 1. And then mechanically by turn 4, it's irrelevant. I mean, several times we've gotten to the point where there was no way to stop them from getting 2 additional points and winning the game, at which point we call it the game because it was irrelevant to play. And
Mhm.
that's, I guess, where my concern is compared to the old mission objectives, where you could surge forward and take the objectives, but then you had to hold them for multiple rounds to get the points and really take the advantage. There were some situations where you got a bunch of points turn 2 and turn 4, but even in those cases with intercepted transmission, on turn 6, it was a matter of you could still come back and win if you had the long shot and you could take all 3 objectives. Okay. Or if it was close, then all you needed to do is hold 2 in the last round. And this, it several games have come down to turn 3, turn 4, it's done. There's no point continuing to play because because the game automatically ends at 12. And I don't necessarily know a good way to fix that. Maybe with experience it becomes more equal. Um, but so far the games have been very much one way or the other. Like I said, the Rebel game versus the Empire was very much so. The games I played against Ben, it was done in round 3, and I had more than 12 points. Um, and he had 3 or 4, I think. And a couple of the games seemed very much lopsided as that. So it feels to me almost like their adjustment has gone. Maybe they swung it too far, or we just haven't adapted enough to the new system.
Well, I don't understand I don't understand how to play the new objectives. So the only thing I can think of, well, I mean, let me elaborate. Okay, so theory crafting in my mind about it. You have your objectives spread out on the board. You have your army spread out on the board. The other guy has his army spread out on the board. I'm talking 2 equally experienced players,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then it just basically becomes a rock paper scissors kind of battle of, as both lines are pushing towards each other, did you have the right unit to fight the opposite number across the board. And if you didn't, you lose that point. And so setup becomes key to everything at that point.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, I have my death troopers and they're going against a squad of B1s. Well, the B1s are slaughtered. It's just the way it is. They're going to get slaughtered. The death troopers get that point. And the rock, paper, scissors match of, because, I mean, you have to spread out your army. Like, I just don't see how that's going to not be the case with every one of the game modes.
I
You give me 20 more games of this, and I promise you that's how that's going to play out every time.
I think in theory, and I want to give Josh and George a chance to chime in on this.
100%. Yeah.
I think the theory is if you have one matchup that is Death Troopers versus B1s, the Death Troopers win. But every time you have that matchup, I have an equivalent matchup where it's, I don't know, Magna Guard versus Stormtroopers, and the Magna Guards win.
100%. That's what I'm saying.
And if those are balanced enough, then the fact that there's 6 points of interest, both sides get 3, and those points become irrelevant. Now it's the secondary objective that makes the difference. Okay? And that's fine if you can actually get that lined up and the dice don't completely ruin the chances. Because, I mean, obviously there's some luck involved here. You roll bad, it doesn't matter. Your Death Troopers are still dead to the B1s.
Yep.
So, Josh, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so ultimately, I think this problem, so to speak, is going to be solved more by our player adaptability. Um, I think there's nothing inherently wrong with that system of counterplaying, counter deploying the rock paper scissors of it, as Thad put it. I think it's just going to be a matter of learning how to effectively do that for the different scenarios and making sure you build an army in a different way now that's going to be able to support, like, you got to have good linebacker units, you got to have good durable units. You know, they're I feel like there's long gone are the days of the cheap backfield unit sit and hold a point. Like that's not a thing anymore, right? So yeah, I think you got to be a little bit more intentional in your army building. You got to be, and then maybe it's just coming down to reps of how to deploy and where to deploy for each objective is where that's going to feel a little bit better and not as one-sided.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. George, what are your thoughts?
That's solid.
Well, I think with the deployment with like the counterbalance and stuff, it mainly comes into who has the most activations. Because at the end of the day, the person with the most activations can slant their side of the board a lot more than the other person. You have the Separatist player with 6 naked B1 squads, and that's what they deploy first. You have no idea what the Separatist has on their deployment, and you're 6 or 7 units deep deploying. Most your armies out there. Then the Separatist player can easily counter as they wish. Also, I think the objectives, I don't really like the cap of 12, because if you have those types of rush type abilities and you get those 8 points or whatever, you can't stop them from reaching 12 before you get into competitive levels. I feel like they should get rid of the cap, because then it allows the players that were more cautious still a chance to come back by defeating the enemies and reversing the initiative with it, and have it more whoever has the most points at the end of the game wins, rather than the first one to 12.
Yeah, I
like
could
that.
see that. I mean, just remove the auto win at 12
Yeah.
and leave everything else intact, and then at the end of turn 5, whoever has the most points wins. Because then, yeah, you can counterattack because they've exposed themselves to get some early points. And if you can do enough damage fast enough and turn the tide with a 5-turn limit, then it becomes a different game. As opposed to right now, we're calling it a turn 3 because they're going to get to 12 and it's done by the definition.
Yeah, so right now it's fastest out to the points wins.
Yeah.
Like in my and Dan's game, his entire army had scout essentially as the Tempest Force. Um, very powerful. He was all up on the objectives, and I found myself on the back foot trying to play defensively, trying to figure out how to not get my unit shot off the board immediately. And then I was never able to pressure the objectives as much.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's just going to come from a point of learning how to build better lists that can be more effective with that. And since I didn't get to make a point on deployment, I'll kind of say it right here.
Sure.
I feel like the scouts and the infiltrates are really, really, really good.
Yeah.
And I think they need to be nerfed a little bit.
Yeah.
With how the current game goes.
Infiltrate is by far the most powerful, I think. I mean, it's effectively a Scout 3 for whatever unit you have. Because you can deploy anywhere within your friendly territory and then take the 2 actions.
It's so good.
But so many units seem to have Scout now, at least in the games and units that we've played. That's one of the big drawbacks, I think, of the Rebels right now, is they only have prepared defenses, and I don't think they have much in the way of Scout, at least not the units I've been playing.
You can. 90% of the units in the game, and that's what I was doing with my Separatists. I mean, none of my Separatists generically had Scout.
Mm-hmm.
But most of my units still did Scout. You can get them Recon Intel, which just gives them Scout 1, but gives you that extra bit on the board, plus having the flexibility of spending whatever your actions you want for free.
Yeah.
They increased it to 5 points, whereas originally I think it was 3 in the previous game.
Well,
it should be like 10.
5 points for that flexibility is pretty low.
Yeah.
Now, as a quick tangent for the Separatists, those crab droids coming out, that give scouting party. I think there's not going to be a viable Separatist list without 3 crab droids in it to give 3, like Magna Guard units scout to get in there, because it's so good. It's just so good.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm sorry. What are you talking about? The crab droid is gonna get
scouting
units coming out. The crab droid is gonna be a support, so you can take 3 of them. I think they're gonna be the size like the spider droid, but then they can give 1 unit scouting party 1.
I didn't
as
know
if
that.
They're like an amphibious assault where they can like they kind of ride up on it. I guess is kind of what it's supposed to be.
I think the scouting party 1 is okay. This crab droid only has scout 1, so it's equivalent of giving that unit that you're scouting partying a recon intel.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
but still, then your crab droids also have it.
Right, you have 2 units with Scout 1, and everything else you give recon intel. Your entire army has Scout 1 then.
And now I'm playing Tempest Force, and now I feel good like Dan was.
Right, because you're and both armies are on top of the objectives round 1, and then fighting in melee because it's a
right
punch
now
and
it's
kick
about
fight.
Speed to the objectives.
Yeah. Tempest Force, I believe, has all Scout 2s or 3s.
But... Yeah, they're far faster.
So gross. Anyways, that's a tangent.
I think Tempest Force is going to be a very popular one right now. So
yeah, I like George's point. Just play to 5 rounds. Whoever has the most points wins. That makes. I mean,
I kind of like that idea, regardless. Just as far as a basic, give the opponent a chance. Because most of the times when we've called it, it's because it's obvious they're going to get to 12, not because the other side can't come back or can't table the opponent, but it's because they artificially end the game early because of the 12-point rule. So maybe that's something we consider as far as a house rule. We just go to however many points or turn 5, if it's viable. I mean, you could still certainly concede, but if you don't think you have a chance to do that, but I think that would change things. I mean, certainly our Empire versus Rebel fight, that would have been a whole different story. The only reason we said the Rebels had won was because I could have gotten to 12 points by turn 3. Turn 4
I would have
5,
I probably would have handily won that game.
I would have been dead at that point. The Rebels weren't really going to survive, but I score the points. So
yeah.
Okay.
And maybe the problem is sorry.
Yeah, fine.
I
Go
got
ahead.
one last thought popped into my head. Maybe the problem is with the current way they've made the primaries and secondaries, like there's kind of only a finite amount of points you can score. With secondaries, each player can only score the same amount of points off of a secondary. Usually, I think there's that one where you could maybe like drop the token and contest the token for like the rest of the game or something like that.
There's one that's you have to give suppression, and every
Yeah.
round I think you can score an extra 3 points.
But
If you
maybe,
panic the entire army and that sort of
yeah,
stuff. But
maybe they tried that. Maybe the problem was it just kept coming up too similar at the end. If you go heavy on the front on one team and then the other opposing player goes heavy on the back end of points, they all kind of end up the same. Maybe, I don't know.
well, possibly, but in my mind, if you end the game turn 5 and both sides have within a point or two, that's a good game.
Sure.
Okay. I mean,
Sure.
if they both come out at 12 or 13 or 15 versus 16, that's a good game. Right
Yeah.
now, it's turn 3. We're at 12, and the other one has 3 because
Yep.
we've only done that initial assault. We haven't done the counterattack, which is where the game changes.
Yep. First to 12 leads to one type of play.
Right.
It's just go as fast as you can.
Yeah.
One secondary that does adjust it a lot is the sweep and clear one, where it's basically you kill the enemy's units, you get a victory point. And if it's in enemy territory or in their deployment zone, you get 2 victory points. So, I mean, if you're fighting separatists or whatever with B1s, you can get a lot of victory points. Or if there's a really aggressive army,
right,
you can quickly get those victory points back by just killing their assault force.
If you keep that objective.
Assuming you aren't taking casualties also in your enemy in your zone, because they're getting 2 times the points for that.
Right. Well, and like I said, given the command build or the mission building mechanics, if you're in that situation where you have 20 activations, the opponent has 10, that's probably going to be one of your priorities to get off the board.
Yeah.
Because of that scenario. So I think it would be uncommon for it to be played because both players can influence the missions compared to the prior version where you really only have one set to choose from.
Just curiosity, which list can actually get up to 20 activations?
Separatists, and I think maybe Rebels, and then maybe Empire.
Yeah.
How is that even possible?
Minimum size is B1 units are cheap.
Yeah.
Actually, I think one of the highest activations that I've seen is actually with either, it was one of the ones where the core trooper has the associated like mortar trooper or placement trooper that doesn't count towards army building minimums or maximums.
Right. So like shore troopers with the mortar.
So you could take 12 core trooper units, right?
And
which is
really
that's where you can, yeah.
You can have 6 special forces with like BXs and then the strike teams.
And then the strike teams. So you have 12 and 6. So you got 18 there just in your cores and I swear to God, I've seen someone go to 20.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to play around with. It sounds expensive though.
I don't think it's that viable because you're running around with like 2 model people.
So,
all right, are we going to wrap this up soon, Sean?
Yeah, we are just about out of time. There's obviously plenty of other rules we didn't touch on. One of which I just remembered was the whole fire support mechanics and how that's changed. Other rules and mechanics and so forth. So I'm sure there's plenty to still learn with the game system. However, we're out of time for this conversation tonight. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Listening in and making the comments. I appreciate it. And thanks for everybody from our group for joining in the conversation. I think this was enlightening, at least for everybody to have some discussion and have a chance to just BS about the overall game and what its current state is. I do want to comment, although in general, I would say a lot of our views might have been negative about some of the changes. Hopefully I'm speaking for everybody in that we like the game. We're continuing the game. We have no reason to drop it from the channel per se, although we still need to record a few more sessions. Hint, hint for everybody. We need to get some more games in to get them recorded for next week. Probably will be recording some more this weekend. As usual, posted on every video. If you like the content, please like and subscribe. I've also reactivated the Patreon just recently, so that's now a thing if anybody's interested. And if you really want to support the channel, check out our Etsy site where we are selling the dashboards that have been keeping me fairly busy with the laser cutter over the last couple of weeks. Those have been surprisingly popular. Otherwise, I appreciate everybody's time. Thanks a lot, and we'll have this edited down a little bit and then posted for general view sometime in the next week or two, or probably next day or two. Probably be available tomorrow for the regular release since we won't have a battle report. So
I'd like to do this discussion again in a month or two after we get some more games.
Sure, yeah, we can certainly do this. I think this was productive. I think this gave us a good opportunity to really think through it, and I like the audience participation as far as questions and details and everything. So we'll set something up for probably for next month or two. So
have a good night.
Thanks a lot, everyone.